Welcome to a new year and a 2019, our first episode of SG Explained this year. We are happy to be back.
Yep.
It is exciting, and Willie and I have actually been talking about even trying new things and making some resolutions with the show, and we're very excited to try it with you guys. There's a lot of new ideas. We may, in fact, get slightly more heated. Willie and I have been practicing our sparring techniques. So if you are interested in a fight, then we are going to have a fight of the mind. I would say,
wow, fight of the mind.
on certain parts of this show. But we've actually chosen very specifically for our first episode of the year a slightly more I think something that Willie and I are passionate about and very interested in. What does it take to become a Singaporean, and in the truest form, in the citizenship application process? What does it take to become a citizen of Singapore?
Yeah, of course.
I think part of that is towards the wider journey of what it means to be a Singaporean, what it means to be a Singaporean by just identity, but even like the citizenship process will maybe inform that in some ways. Because Willie, you were born in Singapore, right?
Yes,
so
I am.
You've always been a citizen.
Yep.
Fun fact, I actually became a citizen only when I was in my teens, I would say.
Okay.
And that's because I immigrated from India. My whole family actually immigrated from India. Only my sister was born in Singapore. But becoming a citizen was actually something I had to do. I had to become a citizen. And so what does that mean? I never actually knew when I was a 10-year-old kid. I kind of just,
Sure.
followed my family. But that was always a big question I had.
I think that this entire citizenship thing and qualifiers and things like that was actually is pretty close to home for me. In fact, it's pretty much like home because my wife became a citizen very recently as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so this is something that I also had to go through with her.
Right.
And I had to be a sponsor for her citizen application as well.
Right.
So this is something that, we're talking about citizenship, something that's also very close to my heart as well.
Right.
And I think it's definitely something we should explore, and it's definitely something we should discuss today.
Right.
Yeah. And of course, everyone, I think as we are trying to share onto our own personal timeline and our own walls, firstly, Happy New Year and Happy 2019. This was our first episode for 2019. Thank you for joining us today. Once again, similar to our programs last year, if you have anything that you want to talk about or discuss regards to today's topic about citizenship application, or if you think that you have some interesting topics that you think that we could talk about in the next episode, please feel free to share in the comment section. We really, really love to hear you. And definitely we really want to hear more from you and really want to hear your views as well.
Yeah, so if you're watching us live, chat with us. That's why we do this live.
Yep.
If not, we would completely be just recording in a recording studio and putting this online. We want to talk to you guys, and we've enjoyed every bit of conversation we've already had with you guys along the way. We've had some great stuff.
Yeah.
So should we dive into this topic? Do you have anything else to tell them?
Yeah, I think I just want to tell the audiences that actually prior to today, we started a little later, about half an hour later. We usually start about 7:30 as supposed to talk. We had a very, very engaging topic and discussion. I think
we kind of, I'm a bit scared that we may have used up all our steam, but I actually feel like I have a lot more.
No, we've got more. We just had dinner, so I think it shouldn't be a problem. I hope that in the future maybe we can go into that kind of real debate online and to really try to see if we can get different people's views as well and how they feel about topics that really hit home. This topic, I think we most of the topics, as you can see, we want to ground them in factual information, and we've done the research to see how we can get this factual information out so that we are really discussing on point. And some things that we try not to do is we don't want to give unsubstantiated opinion. If it's an opinion, it's an opinion. I think what we really want to put ourselves is to give you the correct information and factually what is something that we can all understand.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's the goal. So let's get into
it. Right.
All right. So today we're talking about citizenship in Singapore and what it means to, for the most part, become a citizen of Singapore. So we're talking really about people who are immigrating or people who are looking at becoming a citizen, and what does that mean? But we have to go back to this idea of citizenship, right?
Okay.
We're not gonna be too philosophical with this. the idea of citizenship in Singapore is actually quite recent. So the legal status of a Singapore citizen, right? The idea of a citizen of Singapore as a country came into being with the enactment of the Singapore Citizenship Ordinance in October 1957.
Okay.
So this is only around what?
This is a year after Singapore became independent from Malaysia.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is around 62, 61 actually. We're going into a 62nd
1957.
year. Year, which in the history of nations is not that long.
Right.
So that's very important to know because this idea of what it means to belong to this country is very recent. Right. The backdrop was the imminent conferral of self-government. Oh, so it's not the separation. It's actually when Singapore was allowed to be self-governed.
Oh yes, that's right. 1955.
Yeah, in 1959. So in
oh yes, 1959.
Right. So the UK allowed Singapore to be self-governed in 1959 as a way to prepare for it. In 1957, the Singapore Citizenship Ordinance was created.
That's right.
And basically, before that, a lot of the identity, even within Singapore, because again, Singapore never existed as a proper country per se. The identity of a lot of people was still tied to where they came from.
Sure.
So if you came from Malaysia, if you came from mainland China, if you came from India, that was still primarily what you would consider your identity. You just happened to be on Pulau Ujong, on Singapore, right, the island. And so for a lot of people, Singapore is just a place. And citizenship was a very important thing because if you want to self-govern and you want to be able to get people to pay taxes, you want to get people to commit loyalty to a country, you need this idea of citizenship.
Okay.
Right? So it's important to appreciate this history because we underestimate what citizenship means.
Okay.
Right? So Singapore citizenship in 1957 was offered to those born in Singapore.
Sure.
So if you were born in the country, you got citizenship.
Okay.
Or you were born in the Federation of Malaya, or to British citizens who had resided in Singapore for 2 years. So if you had stayed in a colony for 10 years and were prepared to swear your loyalty to Singapore, you were also allowed to naturalize and become Singapore citizen. So this immense, like at one shot, all these people becoming Singaporean in 1957 was also a big catalyst for the birth and formation of Singapore. This is literally the pioneer generation. When we talk about the pioneer generation, this is what we're talking about. These people who in one shot changed from becoming like a citizen of their homeland or whatever to Singaporean.
Right.
So I think that's an important caveat.
I see.
Yeah, so today the Constitution allows for people to acquire citizenship through one of four means.
Okay.
If you were born here,
sure,
which makes sense.
Okay.
By
Born
descent,
here.
that means
By descent.
if your parents, your grandparents, there's a certain backstop, but yeah, by registration. So or before the commencement of the Constitution, by enrollment or by naturalization. So this is what we were talking about people who were able to switch, right? So this has always been the case. These four methods: birth, descent, registration, or naturalization has been the dominant ways of becoming a Singapore citizen.
I think today it will be mainly either by birth, descent, or by registration, right?
Yeah.
I think today you won't see a situation of naturalization as a means of gaining citizenship in Singapore. Would you say?
Unless someone who always lived in Singapore never decided to become a citizenship, so decides all of a sudden. So it's a very special case. I wouldn't see the need to necessarily tackle it, but yeah, it's allowed for those people if they so choose.
Right, but the likelihood of somebody naturalizing this thing and maybe the government hasn't detected them or something like this.
Right, or you could also argue that it is just an affordance that is given in case, right? Because the principle of it is if you have been here for such a long time, that you are more or less Singaporean, even though you may not have registered for it.
Sure.
It's an affordance.
Sure.
I don't know the legal implications. I wouldn't be able to make a judgment on that, but I think the principle of it is basically saying you've been here so long.
Okay.
If you so choose to become a Singapore citizen, that affordance exists.
Right. I see.
Yeah. So and that's changed. So in 2004, for example, a lot of changes were made to relax the restrictions on the ground of citizenship, so that you the number of family ties that you may need to have is slightly more relaxed. The amount of time that you are allowed to stay away from Singapore, because there's a residence period.
Sure.
So, for example, remember how I mentioned that I had to become a Singapore citizen by registration.
Right.
My family had to be considered residents of Singapore for a certain amount of time, and then that was after which only we were allowed to become citizens.
I see.
So a big part of this, and I think we'll talk about this later. A big part of this is tied to national concerns, right? Our decision on who becomes a Singapore citizen is partially cultural. It's partially even political. But I think most importantly, it is also a question of our population.
Okay.
Right. Immigration is a big part of like controlling our labor force, controlling our ability to support people within the country, so tax, so whatever. So the number of permanent residents between 2000 and 2010. So we don't have this decade's numbers yet, but between 2000 to 2010, the number of permanent residents doubled from around 287,500 to around 541,000.
Wow. Well, in 10 years, we have seen a doubling of our permanent resident population in Singapore.
Exactly. But our number of citizens only grew by 8%.
I see.
So this is around from around 2.98 million to around 3.23
million.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was a small number, and that's because what is known amongst analysts and even in the population white paper that we'll kind of talk about later, is that we have a control goal of around 20 to 25,000 new citizens annually, with in order to complement the citizen birth around 32,000 annual births per year. So that means you're basically taking 32,000 annual births plus around 20 to 25,000 new citizens, and you're hoping that will contribute to an overall population.
So that's about in the odds about 50 to 60,000 new citizens being added to Singapore every year. Right?
Exactly. So that was what was called a sustainable population for dynamic Singapore in that white paper.
Right.
That people refer to.
Right. I see.
Yeah.
Maybe we can discuss about what's the population of actual citizens to PRs and maybe like even people who just reside in Singapore.
Sure.
See. So I have this thing right here, which is the total population as of June 2016, right?
Right.
And the number of, at end 2016, the total population is about 5.6 million.
Right.
And the demographic or the percentage looks something like this. The number of citizens in Singapore was 3.4 million.
Right.
The number of PRs is about 500,000.
Right.
And the number of non-residents are about 1.67 million people.
Right.
Which then, of course, contributes this total population about 5.6 million.
Right.
Yeah.
And then 1.67 million is actually mostly made up of work permit holders,
S-pass holders,
foreign domestic workers, and
students,
the dependables of a lot of these PRs or work permit holders.
In fact, all these non-residents, a large chunk of them actually hold work permit holders. About 44% of them are work permit holders, are the non-resident chunk.
Right.
Yeah. But still, citizens make the largest chunk out of the population in Singapore.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think those numbers indicate why citizenship plays a big role in what it means to build a population and what it means to basically even constitute Singapore. Right. So I think a big question that you and I are trying to answer, and hopefully, maybe we'll be able to have a better opinion in 2 or 3 episodes from now, is what does it mean to be Singaporean? Right? Does immigration change that question? Right? Because it's Singaporean something that we decide, and then we try to put it onto everyone else and say, you kind of have to aspire towards this ideal.
Right.
Or is it something that just takes everyone in the country and says, all of you are Singaporean, and we'll try to find both the lowest common denominator and the highest ideals amongst that.
Right.
So I think those are important things that we need to talk about. But yeah, I know that you basically did some research on immigration in Singapore and how that's changed, and I think that's important for us to understand how that plays a role in citizenship.
Definitely.
Right. So maybe you could share a bit of that.
Sure. I think in this entire thing about what actually somebody qualifies to be a citizen of Singapore,
Right.
I think also ties intrinsically with the direction of the country, and whether it's its immigration policy, whether it's economic policy, even its security policies. I think all plays a very large part to how the number of citizens are being admitted into the country. So maybe just let's go back down memory lane into how this entire immigration to Singapore was like. I think
we're going back way in time.
Especially in this year of bicentennial.
Oh yeah, that's happening this year.
Yeah, that's right. So
did you see that that pop-up thing that happened on the Singapore River where they first like made raffles kind of disappear, and then they also did like a second one where they brought in like Tan Tock Seng and Sangilao Tama, all these leaders.
Yeah,
I thought that was really cool.
Mm.
I have my opinions on raffles, and I think we should do an episode on him at some point. Not a big fan actually, but I'm willing to have a discussion about it.
Sure. But first, let's talk about our population.
Yeah, let's not get distracted. Our listeners and viewers are.
So immigration to Singapore is historically the main impetus for population growth in the country since the founding of modern Singapore in the early 19th century. So essentially, to fuel population growth in Singapore, immigration has played a very, very large part. I think we talk about naturalization as a means, right? We talk about people applying, and this is not talking about birth, and this is not talking about via descent as well.
Right.
Yeah. So in the history, we were actually trying to do a lot of immigration policies to beef up our population size.
Right.
Right. And immigration and immigrant workers in Singapore have been closely associated with the Singapore's economic development. For a long period after its founding, the majority of its population were immigrants. It was not until around the 1930s that the number of native-born in Singapore will overtake new net immigration.
Right.
So what we are seeing is that the number of native births then only began to overtake net immigration about the 1930s.
Right.
Before the 1930s, how Singapore grew was predominantly just immigration.
So the 1930s is actually not too recent. I would say that it's pretty much a good time to say that a lot of people
80 years ago.
Yeah. So you're talking about today's like elderly generation.
Right.
A lot of them would have been born here.
Mm.
Yeah, wow. And I always thought that even today, even the people who are around 80, 90 years old, they would have been mostly immigrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
And after the expulsion from Malaysia in 1965, immigration laws were modified in 1966 to reinforce Singapore's identity as a sovereign state. However, the initial strict controls on immigrant workers were relaxed as demand for labor grew with increased industrialization.
Right.
And immigration will again become the largest contributor to the population increase in Singapore in the late 20th century and early 21st century.
So what you're saying is that we started out being primarily immigration driven.
That's right.
After 1930s, we became mostly people who were born in Singapore, native born.
We're adding to the population size.
Yeah.
Yes.
But now again, we've gone back to relying on immigration as our main driver of population.
That's right. That's right.
Wow. Interesting. That's very
so
interesting.
I think this has got to do with, in my opinion, things like population boom, the baby boomer generation.
Right.
And the replacement rates for that baby boomer generation also plays a large part in, for example, in immigration policies that may be coming into play in modern times.
Right.
And I think you can also see that industrialization and the focus on economic growth was also a fundamental reason for adding to immigration as well.
Yeah.
Right. So these were essentially the kinds of things that were adding to how our population, our citizenry, even our PR citizenry growing.
Right.
Yeah. It's both economic in nature, as well as economic in nature, as well as some things that are happening socially as well, which is like, for example, people not having enough babies is another. Fertility rates, infertility rates,
right,
are also key concerns, especially to either how we're going to be tackling or increasing the number of citizenry through immigration.
Right.
Yeah.
I will say this. I think I can appreciate and to a large extent understand the drive for the increase in citizenship as a primarily economic or even labor kind of consideration. But there are definite social, cultural implications in what it means to be a Singaporean, right? And I wonder what that constitutes in the application process, and even in the integration process, which is not something we'll talk about today.
Yeah.
But I think it comes there as well.
So I think maybe to further on, definitely there's further discussions as to how exactly these entire policies will actually affect the way of how people actually are allowed quotas allowed into Singapore. I think what we tried to do was to try to find out the quotas available online to say how much Singapore is actually administering from what nationalities and what kind of countries in Singapore actually trying to put into our citizenship or even PRs as well.
Right.
But I think this information has been very difficult to find as well. I think I couldn't find anything on this particular area. Yeah.
It's kind of weird that, well, so I can understand, right? There's probably some sensitivity around who we have quotas on to come to Singapore. I think it's personally important for the information to be out there because I think it would be useful to understand what it means to what the direction is for how Singapore is going to be evolving the population. Sure. But I can understand the security consideration as well.
Right. But definitely, I think there are certain other reasons apart from, I think later we'll be talking about what exactly are the criteria if you want to apply for citizenship or maybe even for PR as well. But definitely there are criteria because we are only allowing about 20 to 25,000 new citizens through through immigration into Singapore. And definitely, I think this is this limitation will definitely be something that is worth discussing as well to know how exactly we allocate these 20 to 25,000 people into Singapore's or to become family of Singapore.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So it's pretty cool. Maybe we can go into how we discuss about what exactly are the criteria that probably within citizenship that that typically what do you need to become a citizen?
Right.
What exactly are the things that would help your chances of becoming a citizen within Singapore as well?
Right. So, okay, before we do that,
okay.
I actually found it interesting. I wanted to see what the politicians and leaders of the country thought about new citizens, right?
Sure.
What did they see as the role of new citizens? So I found this the speech by Lee Hsien Loong addressing around 150 new citizens in a citizenship ceremony. I'll explain what that is later, but it's basically a ceremony to say, congratulations, you're Singaporean.
I've been to one.
Oh, you have? Oh, yeah, for your wife.
Yeah,
right. You should share later how that was like. But basically, this was in Ang Mo Kio and Sengkang West. And he basically said, your fellow Singaporean welcomes you formally into the family today. And you will bring with you, and I found this very important, you will bring with you your experiences, your skills, your talents, your warmth to enrich the diversity of society. So what he's saying is that basically he recognizes the new immigrants in being innately important to the diversity of Singapore.
Sure.
So, and then he continues to say, at the same time, naturally, you have to make the effort to become a Singaporean, to contribute your part to Singapore.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting because this goes back to the debate, right? Is being Singaporean hitting an ideal that is already set?
Okay.
Or is it being who you are and adding to the intrinsic diversity and non-confirmation of what it means to be Singaporean?
Sure.
By virtue of not being set by anything, you are innately being Singaporean.
Sure.
Right. So I think that's something that I've been thinking about, and that paradox is very, very, very.
Do you find it a contradiction?
Yeah, and I think he's very smart in putting a contradiction. He doesn't have to deal with it at a policy level because he's giving a speech.
Right.
He can say both things, and everyone will be happy.
I mean, the interesting thing is I don't find it a contradiction at all. I find it as people bringing their different experiences to the table, but essentially it is don't be ignorant to what exactly has built the current Singapore culture.
Sure.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. So by being aware of what you are and being able to adapt to that kind of culture, could you also add more to that culture is something. So,
but there's also a danger, right, where by trying to adapt, there's one thing to adapt and be savvy, and there's another thing to adapt and conform. Because by you conforming, are you really adding value in your diversity? right? So I think there's a tension there. There's a tension.
Sure. I think that really boils down to an individual and how exactly he sees or he or she sees a position as well.
Right.
I think conforming to certain norms as well is necessary in order for the daily functioning of society.
Right.
But at the same time, how do you then, within the confines of the conformity, also bring your value and bring your diversity into that entire mix? And,
Right.
and of course, definitely make it palatable for people to understand and accept your diversity as well, which is very important.
Right. So why don't we look at the standards that have been set as your minimum criteria to be a Singaporean, right? So
oh, cool. We got somebody from who came in with a comment. Zikai is saying, is being Singaporean at the cost of renouncing one's natural citizenship worth it for most? Restriction on dual citizenship. Interestingly, we actually have some information on dual citizenship.
Yeah.
But maybe let's get through this first, and Zikai will come back to you if we got time to discuss about this thing about.
I think it's a great question because that's actually something. So okay, bit of a backstory. We basically found a lot of information on there are people who make money and sure it makes sense on helping people become Singaporean.
Right.
There's a whole industry out there in helping people become Singaporean. And so I found one of these websites where basically it was a step-by-step guide on the steps to becoming a Singaporean. And I remember the two of us were talking about this and how it's actually so interesting that there are even some tips and tricks to sussing out whether you have the likelihood of being a Singaporean. Okay, so step one.
Okay.
You review your eligibility, right? Oh, I can't believe I almost mispronounced it.
It's okay.
Review your eligibility. You have a couple of key things to fulfill in order to be able to apply as an individual, as for yourself to be Singaporean.
Okay,
you need to be first 21 years of age.
Okay, first.
And you need to have been a PR for at least 2 to 6 years prior to the date of application.
Okay, so you need to be an adult.
Yes.
All right, and you need to have at least been a PR for 2 to 6 years.
Yes.
Before you apply.
Yes.
Okay.
If you are not that person, you can still apply for Singapore citizenship as a child born outside of Singapore whose parent is a Singapore citizen.
Okay.
Or you are the spouse of a Singapore citizen with a minimum of 2 years PR and married for at least 2 years preceding the date of application.
Okay.
So you either apply as for yourself or as a spouse of a Singapore citizen or as a child born outside Singapore whose parent is a Singapore citizen.
Okay, sure.
If you're born in Singapore, then you fall under the, Singaporean by birth.
By birth,
yeah.
I see.
So this is for registration.
Right.
In addition to those eligibility requirements, you can also look at these factors as maybe helpful indicators of how likely you are to be accepted as a Singapore citizen.
Okay.
So your track record of living in Singapore during your permanent residence. That means what did you do, right? Were you employed? Were you contributing? Were you paying taxes?
Right.
Your good character and law-abiding nature.
Okay.
So basically, you didn't break the law.
Okay. No criminal record.
The good character is slightly ambiguous.
Okay.
I want to take it in good faith and say good character just means you're a good person.
Okay.
But what if you said something that was controversial or, maybe against the establishment view, right? Does that take you away from the open-ended? I would say.
Okay.
I just think it's broad. That's what I would say.
Okay, sure.
Your social and financial investment into Singapore, indicating your intention to stay in Singapore long term.
Okay.
So that means how
are you
tight.
Invested, are you invested into the country?
I think that's valid.
Okay.
Your ability to be an asset to Singapore, not a liability. In other words, your ability to generate income for you and your family, and your overall financial strength. That means you're basically becoming a Singapore citizen and not immediately drawing on Singapore's welfare.
Right.
So again, these are from an external blog. This is not from ICA or anything. I think that's important to note that these are just guidelines that people have given.
Right.
But the only thing that is like gospel truth is you need to be the three things: at least 21 years of age, and applying for yourself, the spouse of a Singapore citizen, or a child born.
You must be 21 years old, and you must be already a PR.
Yes.
Right. To be able to be to apply for citizenship.
Correct.
That's cool.
Right.
That's interesting.
You of course need to submit documents. These documents include the stuff you'd expect: your passport, your birth cert,
marriage certificates.
Yeah.
educational certificate. So I went through the marriage certificate part because I need to be a sponsor for my wife, right?
Oh, right.
So yeah, so I definitely had to or she definitely had to hand in her marriage certificate that we have within Singapore,
Right.
To qualify or at least to apply for citizenship within Singapore as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So it basically is, as you would expect in a country like Singapore, you would need all your documentation
Right.
to prove that you're above water, and that you can basically demonstrate. There have been, again, the same website, which is, again, a guide, has provided certain additional documents that could be useful.
Okay.
And I found this interesting because, again, I never had to apply for myself for citizenship, so I imagine that these are some helpful tips. They recommend having a cover letter to give like a good summary, like anecdotal narrative of like why Singapore citizenship is something you'd want. If you have purchased any properties, then to show basically your financial rootedness, and that's there, as well as financial assets. So basically your job in all this documentation is to convince the authorities that Singapore will not only want you, but will benefit from granting you the citizenship status.
Right.
Because you are basically going to be an asset to the country.
Sure, definitely.
Yeah. The application procedure you can either do it online, so there's an electronic application, or you can basically complete the form, make an appointment, and then go down and talk to an ICA officer, Immigration Checkpoints Authority officer.
Right.
There are certain fees, which makes sense. There is a fee for the application, $100, and then another $70 for the citizenship certificate, and then if you get an IC, like your pink NRIC,
it's $10.
National Registration Identity Card.
So it's going to cost you $180 of cash to become a citizen after you become from a PR.
There's also another $70 actually for your passport.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's if you intend to have a passport. Okay, sure, fine, fair enough. So if you say $180, and then with a passport, $70 is going to set you about $250 to become a citizen. Right.
But that goes back into the advantages of being a Singapore citizen.
Of course.
So $250 is maybe your financial costs, and there's other costs like renouncing your citizenship and the other stuff. But the benefits that come with all of it, for example, you get the passport, which is one of the most powerful passports in the world.
Sure.
You get access to Singapore's CPF system.
Right.
You get access
no doubt about that. Okay.
You get access to our welfare, which in some ways, like our healthcare and all that stuff, do benefit citizens more than others. I did remember reading on the same blog that the downsides to the citizenship process is also the CPF. So I thought that was quite fun. Basically, your money gets locked up for a while.
Right, you'll need to contribute the CPF once. Actually, I think as a PR, you need to really contribute CPF as well. Right. Yeah, and then thereafter, as citizenship, you will need to contribute a larger portion into CPF. Yeah,
right.
So that's I suppose that's the drawback to some individuals. Right. But some people see an upside in this area as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe that answers Chikai's question a bit. But we'll talk about dual citizenship later.
Okay.
But basically Singapore, the short answer is that no, Singapore says no to dual citizenship because of a couple of reasons.
Sure.
The application outcome, so from the day you apply, it takes between 6 to 12 months to receive the outcome of your citizenship application filing, and you will receive a letter notifying you of the outcome. So it's quite weird because you can do all the application process online, you can do all the registration online, but the results only come in letter. There's no online system. There's no online system to check the status of your application, but you can call the ICA office and they will tell you the status. So it's interesting. The most common, this blog again, the most common response that you'll get is it is under processing. So they won't tell you how long it's going to take. They'll just tell you, hey, someone else is making that call, someone else is evaluating. I can't give you too much information.
Sure. This guy has another question, which is I'm curious to know what demographics make up immigrant citizenship. I think earlier on we discussed about what exactly is the amount of people who are immigrants who actually add to the citizenship. I think we talked about 20 to 25,000 new citizens from immigration,
right?
And then another 35,000 from births
Right.
from Singaporeans, or
Around 32,000
around
actually.
32,000.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at, I mean, far back about 20, 30 years ago, and how we are actually ramping up to the amount of citizens in the country, about maybe almost about 40% from that period of time until
Right.
now was added by immigration
Right.
every year. So out of the 50,000 people added every year to citizens, we are looking at probably about 40% are actually accounting from immigration.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to the makeup, like we said, we don't have facts on it. We don't want to talk on non-facts. There are different people who have different controversy theories, and you can find them easily online. Some controversy theories basically say, oh, like there's a certain agenda when it comes to the makeup of it. There are also basically people who say it's basically a first come first serve. We don't know.
Sure. I think the basic question is how many are first-time Singaporeans or first-generation Singaporeans
Right.
they're being added every year. So I think that's essentially the question of the demographic, because I think this question is really something that a lot of people are in a lot of people's minds, which is the adding, like we talked about earlier, the adding to the culture of Singapore.
Right.
Is it really what we call a cultural diversity that is being added, or is this really a dilution of our culture or Singaporean identity as well?
Right.
What exactly, I mean, in the future, cultural identity is something that's very important to each of the countries. It shows that we are Singaporean as well, right?
Right.
And I think earlier on when we discussed about Lee Hsien Loong's speech to new citizens, it's welcome to the family. And now that we've become a family unit, it's sort of exclusive position, and there must be an understanding of how the family works as well.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think this is a very interesting topic, definitely worth discussing, and definitely important for us to also understand what heritage and where we're going to move forward.
Right.
Predominantly, I still think that it's important to understand we were an immigrant country.
Right.
Yeah, since the 1930s. But before the 1930s, it was predominantly immigration that was more than people coming into the country, they're being produced from the country. Right. It was only until after the 1930s that birth rates were higher than immigration.
Right. Yeah. Chukai asked a follow-up question, and we're going to answer that before we go back to this to what we have. He asked for which countries they come from, and I think that's something we actually discussed earlier. So Chukai, not the numbers for which countries they come from that could give us ideas as to which country citizens are willing to give up their citizenship. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, maybe even if knowing if the demographics is made out of mostly spouse immigrant citizenship. I think this is something that if we are talking about what nationalities make up new immigrants, I think this is something that we try to research. Unfortunately, I don't think we came out short to. If people do know, actually, please feel free to give us. Yeah, and that's the whole point of this live show. It's to find out from you people, any additional information that we may not have been able to find. Regarding spouses becoming citizenships, I think maybe one good telltale sign as to how many spouses become citizens is to really look at the amount of non-residents within Singapore that actually make up. So there are things like dependents of citizens or PRs or work pass holders. These dependents actually make up about 16% of non-residents in Singapore. Yes. Right. So 16% out of about 1.6 million people make up that category of spouses. And then how they translate into becoming citizens and the process of them becoming citizens is quite telling as well. Right. Yeah. So if you say that every year about 500,000 PRs have spouses, then you are saying that we're adding another potentially another 500,000 people into it. But we can't tell those numbers. We can't tell these numbers from where we are right now. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the step-by-step process. Yes. So we stopped at step 4, which is waiting for your results. Step 5 is once you are told, hey, you can become a citizen, you will take your oath taking. So that is where, first of all, you have to renounce your foreign citizenship. Of course. So you have to go to the embassy of your current nationality and tell them, hey, I want to give up my current citizenship because I have been approved to be a Singapore citizen. Right. You will do your renouncing, and then you will basically go back to the Singapore ICA, and you will tell them, all right, I have my certificate, I have my PR card, I have everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to take my oath of allegiance and loyalty.
Right.
And basically say, I vow to be a Singaporean. I remember doing this, and I remember having to like do the national anthem and pledge,
Yes.
which was cool. I mean, I've been in Singapore for practically my whole life, so it wasn't like I had to memorize it just for the ceremony. I've been going through school, and I'd known all of this. My parents had to, because they started off working. They never actually had to sing the national anthem at work.
Okay.
So they had to learn it, and it was something that they always like. I remember like for that whole period, they were like keep singing it at home, and I'd be like, okay, this is kind of funny that they are practicing the national anthem. It showed like actual effort to understand what it was to be a Singaporean.
That's cool.
After the oath-taking event, so the oath-taking event is a private thing. It's between you and ICA. You have a public thing, and I think that's the big purpose. It's a public affirmation of your citizenship. It is compulsory, so I found that funny. It is compulsory except for infants or aged and handicapped adults. You will have to go to your local community center nearest to your place of residence, and you'll basically have to publicly affirm your citizenship. It's supposed to be quite nice. Like there's a speech by a guest of honor. Normally it's your MP or a state minister. There's a pledge, national anthem. They give you your certificate and IC, and there's a buffet for you. So I assume all of that is under your application fee.
Do you know what's an equivalent of something like that in young Singaporean men?
The army.
Yes, army, exactly. Right, when we are given back our pink ICs. Yeah, that's something as well.
right. I can totally imagine that feeling.
So I think I went for my wife's ceremony as well. And when she was handed her pink IC, I just totally recalled about the time when I was in army, I was handed back my pink IC as well. I was like, oh yes, very, very happy.
My IC wasn't given back to me as a ceremony. It was just like, here you go.
Oh, here you go. I see.
I remember more getting my 11B. Or rather the process of enlisting. That was more ceremonial.
Oh, that's true. That's true. They go, take it back.
Yeah. By that point, I didn't want a ceremony. I just wanted
your freedom.
So, dude, I cannot wait to do this national service episode. I have so many opinions. But yes. Some questions about citizenship process.
Right.
Certain reasons. Again, this is from a blog. So certain reasons for why your application could be rejected: your financial well-being, your track of being a lawful individual. Maybe you have demonstrated you are not really trying to settle in Singapore for the long haul, so maybe they suspect that you are just trying to take advantage of tax residence or whatever. Of course. You can try to meet, so there's certain ways of like getting recourse. So you could try to meet, like get an appointment with a senior ICA officer and ask for guidance. And the ICA officer, again, from the blog, there is a chance the officer might give you a hint. So you can take note of what you did wrong when you applied last time.
Right.
You can see if your documentation was weak, or you can just wait for a year and reapply. And basically the government has the right to revoke your application. So I mean, even if you got your citizenship, if you did it by submitting false documents or you falsified facts, all of this is due cause for basically...
Which is kind of dangerous, don't you think? So, I mean, you already renounced your previous citizenship, and if they revoke your application at this juncture when you received your Singapore citizenship, it's basically you become stateless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just immediately, because you don't have any more, unless, of course, you didn't renounce your citizenship elsewhere. But if not, if you have, then you're immediately becoming a stateless person. So I think that sometimes actually do happen.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy, because I think I was listening to some videos as well. People who are stateless in Singapore, they actually on their IC they write they're stateless.
Right.
Yeah, kind of like that's kind of crazy.
Fascinating.
Yeah, you don't belong. You're an alien to all nations.
Right.
Yeah, because you don't belong anywhere. It's kind of a very sad situation to be in.
It goes back to the idea of what is citizenship, right? And what does it mean to belong to a country?
Definitely. I think maybe in the remainder of the time, let's talk about topics that we can't answer, or maybe let's talk about the first thing that Tsukai talk about is dual citizenship as well, and maybe something about why Singapore, or maybe just to answer your question, Tsukai's earlier question that we tried to answer was that, is being Singaporean at the cost of renouncing one's natural citizenship worth it for most? because of Singapore's restriction on dual citizenship.
Right.
I think this is a really subjective question as to it depends on which country you're coming from. For some people, this was actually a really good deal, right? To be coming out from their own country, they don't mind renouncing their current country. But if, for example, somebody is coming from another country in which they feel that they are having certain benefits, or they really, really love that country, but at the same time, they also love this country at the same time. I think Singapore doesn't allow that dual citizenship because it's more like you don't know where your allegiance lies.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the position that is actually given by the government is that it is undesirable because of Singapore's geopolitical position. Because we currently try to be as neutral as possible.
Right.
So we have a set of diplomatic and deterrent relationships.
Sure.
But ultimately, we try to be neutral. But if citizens have multiple allegiances, those can be compromised in times of national crisis. And so without a second citizenship, then basically dual citizens can be committed to Singapore the whole time and won't leave that opportunity to be fickle. So that means like, when Singapore's doing well, then I'll be Singapore citizen. And then the moment it's not, then I'll renounce and just go back to being a citizen of one country.
Definitely. I think it's also, they want to prevent this fear that those without a second citizenship may feel aggrieved if dual citizenships actually enjoy the benefits of both citizenships as well.
So I get that, and I get that backstop that is in place. I think it is worth talking about the fact that in today's globalized society, there are people, may not be even a sizable majority, but there are people, notable numbers, that are, they do have families around the rest of the world. They have either they've come from other parts of the world and they've settled down in Singapore, or maybe they've gone overseas. They've seen that, hey, like there's a home that I want to build here as well.
Yeah.
I think there's always a stigma to say like, no, you should be loyal to one place, and I think that is a values-based position. I think it's worth asking why not, right? Like, why not be able to have affinity to two places? The question of citizenship, I think, is a more complex thing. But the idea of having affinity, the idea of being able to say Singapore is home, but I also can see country X as home as well. Country X is somewhere that I consider dear to me.
Sure.
Why isn't that? I think the attitude towards that is something to also just be more open to in general. I don't know how that translates to citizenship. I would agree with the backstop position, like don't allow.
Maybe it could be residencies, but I suppose when you want to be a citizen of two countries, that's taking a different step, because you have things like permanent residents or PRs that are actually available to you as well.
Right.
The consideration to say holding two distinct citizenships definitely will be a proof of an allegiance issue that will definitely come about.
Right.
An issue of security, an issue of geopolitical position, an issue of basically bailing on the country when something goes wrong and then moving to another. And what that means is that you might consider having a dual citizenship as an economic consideration rather than an emotional affinity necessarily.
Yeah, but I think it's difficult to remove that emotional part for a lot of people, right? Because yes, you may be saying no on a security or a national concern basis, but to a lot of people, it's basically also an emotional decision. And I'm not saying that has to be the decision-making thing. It's just something to recognize how Singapore is evolving, how our population is evolving, and how people are also moving around the world and finding different ways to live in this world. I just think that's something to appreciate.
Sure. And I think to maybe answer Zikai's position, I think because there are certain considerations in which the government has already put out in place of considering why dual citizenship might not exactly be something that's necessarily beneficial to not just individual but actually society at large in Singapore, which is why there's a curb or restriction on dual citizenship.
Right.
And definitely an individual from another nation who wants to apply to Singapore and has to deal with the fact that he needs to renounce his current allegiance to a country is something really personal to the individual as to why he or she feels it's important to take on a Singapore citizenship, whether emotional or logical in nature.
Right.
Yeah.
The last thing I kind of thought it would be cool to talk about was, beyond the requirements that we talked about just now, should there be more requirements to being a Singapore citizen? So in 2016, this guy called Daryl David, so he's an MP for Ang Mo Kio GRC, suggested, this was actually his first parliamentary speech as well. He suggested that on top of the existing criteria, there should be 2 additional criteria for becoming a Singapore citizen. You need to pass a basic English test, and you need to do mandatory community work. And those 2 things would be additional prerequisites for you to apply for Singapore. And basically, a lot of people were supportive of that because they basically said, people should be able to do even a citizenship test, right? And this is something that happens in Australia and the UK, where these countries face a lot of immigration as well. Certain places have a point system, right? So there's a lottery, and the only way to become a citizen is if you satisfy a certain point system. So it's even more calculative in some ways. So I guess a good question to ask is if, does it make sense to be more selective of being Singaporean, or what it means to be a Singaporean? Should we have requirements like speaking English as a primary or dominant language? Doing community work and having a certain knowledge of Singapore things. I think those are really interesting questions because they speak to A, what we want from new Singaporeans, and B, what we think of ourselves as Singaporeans. So I think those are interesting questions. So before I say my opinion, I actually am very interested to hear yours because I feel like whenever I say mine, you challenge it immediately. So I want to hear yours, and then I'm ready to challenge them.
Oh, okay, sure. I mean, as in, what do I view about standardized testings for citizenship criteria?
Yeah,
I think it's great. I think definitely if it fits the overarching objective of why we need immigration in the first place of actually having more citizens in Singapore, then definitely I will put a standardized test. Definitely something is very important. Like for example, it could naturally be. When a spouse joins Singapore to become a Singaporean, really it is to increase the birth rate of Singapore. Is it necessary for the individual to then be able to converse or maybe to be able to know certain histories or certain kind of testing? I think this is where the subjectivity lies. It really boils down to what is the objective that we're trying to achieve out of immigration for Singapore.
It also goes back, in my opinion, to where did we decide that, okay, this is the mix that we are okay with for Singapore, right? Because we were primarily an immigrant country for a long time. We had a certain mix of Chinese, Malay, Indian nationalities, and then now we have even more, right? So we have Filipino, we have Indonesian, we have Vietnamese. Are those people who want to come and become Singaporean, are those people supposed to conform to the Chinese, Malay, Indian broad categorization, or can we as Singapore see these cultures also adding to the overall tapestry of what it means to be a Singaporean?
Interesting that you point out Filipino, because my neighbor who just lives next door is a Filipino family.
Right.
Yeah, and no, they're great. I mean, they were very nice. They bought presents for my kids for Christmas. So I think definitely. I mean, the consideration for what makes you Singaporean must definitely be established. The objectives of why we want immigration is also, it could be for economic reasons for Singapore.
But that's where I think it's worth questioning the values in it, right? Because I think what I'm saying is that we never actually took a stock take and said, okay, like this is where we decide we're gonna keep a stasis on what it means to be a Singaporean, right? Because why can't being Singaporean continue to evolve with the demographic makeup, with what kind of nationalities we have, with what kind of, remember our episode, you weren't here, I did it with Zul, but the episode we did on Singlish, right? Singlish was a cultural response from different diasporas basically coming together and rejecting this almost top-down imposition of an external language, right? And it was almost this beautiful way of different communities saying we're going to create something of our own.
Okay, sure.
When did we say we're going to stop, we're going to keep everything frozen, and then we are going to basically say anyone else who comes in, you kind of have to conform to this, right? Because that kind of goes against the spirit, in my opinion, of how Singapore became Singapore, right? Of how our culture evolved and accepted communities and intrinsically became its own thing, and is always becoming a new thing. And that's the same thing for a lot of big cities, New York, London, even current cities that are maybe more national, like for example Delhi and Beijing. They are still seeing their own kinds of diversity from its domestic influx, right? These places are also realizing that having an identity is not necessarily an exclusive thing, but learning how to become more amorphous with the inclusivity.
I suppose this is a question of potentially how we define the identity of an individual or society.
Right.
I think definitely being part of a group is conforming to the norms of the group. Definitely, as a group, the group must also agree to explore new areas in which they're supposed to. I think it's also consensus.
Right.
So I think it's something that when you are integrating, it's really the population or the the amalgamation of the population and their willingness to actually explore and discover and to add on to their arsenal or to their diversity. I think this definitely, of course, some level of diversity also breeds new innovation, new thinking, and definitely new things. But it also disrupts certain cultures and norms which things are done. For example, it could be a disruption to efficiency of things. It could be a disruption to way of life for certain individuals,
right,
or how things are being done. It could be jarring to some negativities could be introduced into society as well,
right,
through certain things as well. So I think that as much as there are the upsides of certain things that could come from immigration, I think that my personal take is that we should also be aware of, for example, not to be ignorant of the current situation that we're in, or not having a full understanding of the culture of what it is made up to be, what it is today.
Right.
Right. So I think if we say that culture and identity is an ever amorphous or ever morphing identity, then what exactly is an identity?
So that's a great question that we'll probably keep trying to answer.
Definitely.
I think it's a good time to basically wrap up the episode, but also anyone who's listening and anyone who has been listening throughout this episode, we want to hear your views on what does it mean to be a Singaporean, especially based on our citizenship conversation, especially based on with this increasing influx of different kinds of immigrants. Does that definition of citizenship and identity change?
Right.
We want to hear from you. Comment, send us a message, whatever you feel comfortable. Like, let us know, because this is a conversation that we're trying to get people involved in, and we want to hear all the diversity of ideas.
Definitely. One last thing from Zikai has made a really interesting point is it's quite funny that Singaporeans are actually not recognized as native English speakers overseas. I'm not sure what you mean by overseas.
Well, as in, so for example, if you go like when I was in London or Chicago, like when I said, "Oh, I'm Singaporean," or they would be like, "Oh, so how is your English so well?" Right? Or even like sometimes they'll ask you to do your TOEFL, foreign English as a foreign language, even though you've done your O and A levels in English.
Right.
They'll say, "No, we don't recognize English."
The funny thing is, when I go to China, they treat me as though I'm a native English speaker.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah. So I think it really depends on which countries you reside in and which countries you visit.
Yeah.
I think definitely from the source of where English is from, they would consider that because you don't fit their ideal image of where native English speakers could come from, they have sort of like a preconceived notion of how exactly these things are. Yeah. Definitely, this is a cultural societal thinking that I think through exposure and through really interaction, we should be able to educate one another.
Right.
Yeah.
So once again, let us know your thoughts on everything that we have debated but haven't come to a conclusion on. We'll continue to be tackling this in our next few episodes, and we want to hear all of your views. But we're excited to be back in 2019.
Maybe before we go, just one last thing so that I can leave something for you guys to leave in the comment section, and something that we'll be discussing in due course, and especially very timely for our bicentennial year, is what do you think makes a Singaporean? What do you think is a Singaporean identity? And if you guys can really leave it in the comment section, we would love to hear from you. We definitely want to hear your views on what exactly is a Singaporean identity. for example, is in an ever-evolving state of flux of identity, or really it's something that's more definitive or absolute, something that yeah, of course definitely want to hear your views before we leave, and definitely want to hear more from you guys as well.
All right.
Yeah.
It's been an hour.
Yeah.
We've always enjoyed doing this. Thank you for participating, Chukai, MVP of the
MVP
show.
of the show today.
Thank you so much, and see you around.
See you guys, man. Take care.
Ciao.
All right. Good job.